views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Open. I'm your host, Daren Jaime. You can catch me here every Wednesday here on BronxNet's television. I want to let you know 2020 has been an unexpected and an eventful year for us all. Throughout the year, we worked hard to keep our viewers informed with coronavirus news, politics, health, and much, much more. On this edition of Open, we're highlighting the best of 2020. We want you to stay with us, and because all this and much more is heading your way. Right now, we're officially open. And hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Wednesday. I am Daren Jaime. Of course, we thank you for watching. And of course, we thank our viewers who are watching on Manhattan Neighborhood Network as Open is broadcast live simultaneously on the MNN channels. We encourage you to stay connected to us here on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV and, of course, our website at bronxnet.org. Well, the coronavirus has actually caused many people to have challenges and obstacles all across the city. Not just the city, the state, and not just the state, but literally all across the globe. Since the start of the pandemic, our BronxNet staff has worked feverishly in transitioning from our traditional studio space, adjusting to the new reality of working virtually and remotely from home. We continue to provide you with the latest of news, information, and current events the way that you would want to have it brought to you. We also talked about the pandemic and how New Yorkers are actually transitioning and handling. We start off now with an in-depth look at the coronavirus pandemic.
I believe that the period is up until April 29th, but it doesn't matter one day on or off. We're talking about the rest of April. That's the right thing to do. And I understand that people are, many folks have already been inside their homes for a couple of weeks. They're getting a little bit stir crazy and they're trying to figure out what's going on or what's not going on. The reality is that this is not something to be messed with. We have to look at places like Hong Kong and some places in China where they kind of took the foot off the gas a little bit too early. The reality is that this is something that is incredibly contagious. It is deadly for a large chunk of the population. And even if we're talking about 1%, and in the state and in the country, actually, we are hovering around 3% nationally. That is incredibly serious. We need to take it seriously, and it's going to have an impact on our lives, but we are better off doing this because we want to keep our lives and, more importantly, the lives of our loved ones, people who are high risk, are older people that have diseases which make their systems compromised, or folks with respiratory illnesses. And when you think about the Bronx in particular, the Bronx, with the health of people in the Bronx. We've talked about this many times on your show, about the fact that the Bronx is the unhealthiest county in the state. We are seeing the result of that. When you're talking about Bronxites, we are 3 more times likelier to die in the Bronx than we are if we lived in Manhattan, and that's during this crisis. We can't ignore that. So we should stay home. It's going to be an impactful month. It's going to be difficult, but we need to do it to make sure that we can be healthy at the end of it.
Well, it's interesting because when people ask me if I'm working with COVID patients, I have to tell them that almost every patient in the hospital is COVID. Every floor on every unit has been turned into COVID beds. We have patients in common areas or what used to be family areas that were never meant for patient care, but now when the governor asked us to increase capacity by 50%, so now there's hospital beds in waiting rooms and family rooms in spaces where we normally would not put patients in. So many patients are either on oxygen or ventilated. and I was commenting to you that the hospital where I work in Montefiore in the Bronx, here, we had run out of ventilators by March 27th already. Every ventilator that we've used since then has been some kind of portable machine that has been brought in or procured from either the hospital or the governor. And we had never seen numbers like this, the amount of people sick and how severe and acutely ill people are becoming. I think a lot of us hold on to each other's faith and hold on to each other for support. But the reality is that as healthcare workers, we're not immune to being sick. So many of the nurses and the doctors, the PAs, the ancillary staff, I mean, people who work in the kitchens, the secretary, everybody's getting sick. So we're all overworked, understaffed. On a regular day, they wouldn't give you 2 patients on a ventilator. But the reality is that when you have very little staff, you might end up with 3 patients on a ventilator and you have a census or a patient load of maybe 8, 9. Some nurses have said we've had 12 patients on a shift because there's only 2 nurses on the floor, whereas on a regular day, under normal circumstances, you would have 5 or 6 nurses on the floor. We are worn out and exhausted. It's one of the reasons why I went back to work, because I know they need me. I know that they're short-staffed. And if there's anything that I could do to help by putting my expertise to use, that's the only thing that I can do. But we're all very tired.
This is not ideal, and it's not ideal, number one, because we were not prepared. Number two, the federal government has not been a friend to us. They refused to release the PPEs that we needed a month ago. You know, when we hear numbers like 500,000 masks will go to the nurses, that's not that many. You have to put into your minds that there are thousands of patients coming through New York City hospitals every single day. So to have 500,000 masks, how long is that going to last for? Not very long at all. And so our reserve needs to be built up. And I mean, we're seeing these amazing stories from people who are basically sitting in their homes or in their factories. You have fashion designers basically sewing just regular masks so people at least have something. But we should not be in this situation as a city or as a state. And so I think that, you know, we don't even have the time to criticize it right now, which sounds even silly. We have to just really act and provide the resources. But when this is all over, we've got to take a real forensic at what happened here.
I think it's devastating, and I'm sure everybody's feeling it across the Bronx. The sentiment is some people are confused because they really don't understand if it's that big of a deal or if it, like, everything really moved very quickly. And then I've had conversations with restaurants, and it's disheartening to hear how customers stopped going in probably about a week ago or so. And now with it shut down completely for sitting down, their businesses are completely empty. I had one business tell me that they're not sure if they can survive this process, but we're going to try to do everything we can to provide all the information. But it's really disheartening and heartbreaking. The Bronx is in a position to grow, and businesses are just opening up on a daily basis, and this kind of like turned the clock on us.
Affected my business in the sense that I usually work with 15 employees on a weekly basis, and they're all currently unemployed. I had to let go every single one of them. I'm currently working here by myself, taking all the orders, takeout orders, just to maintain the business open, try to keep the doors open until this is all over. It's taking a toll on myself because I'm here working every single day from 1 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. And basically I'm here by myself, just dealing with all the takeout orders. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. We're here, we don't get any orders at all, but I'm sticking it through. I'm trying to make sure that our doors are open once this is all over with.
Right. The reality is very sobering. You know, on 3rd Avenue and probably throughout many of our commercial districts, we're looking at extraordinary circumstances where many of our businesses who are forced to shutter will most likely not reopen without significant assistance from the government. And consumer foot traffic is down, and as it should be. People should be heeding the warnings of government. But this is really having a significant detriment on our small businesses. And it seems like every day, every hour, there's new information coming out, and we are just now seeing a concerted response from both city, state, and federal partners to start to roll out a plan to assist small businesses. But even in the short time that's taken, a lot of small businesses are struggling and will most likely have to close their doors.
We started out with our employee retention loan program, grant program, and also a business continuity loan program. We did extensive outreach across the city and, really was able to assist businesses and get into those loan funds. Then that was really a stopgap, right? Because this problem was so big and enormous that we really needed a federal response. I mean, this is unprecedented. It's something we've never had before. And so what we've pivoted to is resourcing our MWBEs, our small businesses, our mom and pop shops, to get really access to the federal grants and the federal loans. And I think that is really where it's key for us, right? We have 240,000 businesses in the state that received about $40 billion of loan funds from the federal government. So listen, they have the resources. And we pivoted our operations to help our MWBE small businesses and our mom and pop shops to get those funds. And they're getting those funds and really at a tune that we are very, very happy with. So the challenge again before was when we started the program and we rolled it out, we did the outreach, we spoke to those businesses, we worked with the chambers of commerces, we worked also with the bids, we worked with several of our partners in the Bronx and around the city. Are we happy with sort of how the borough disparity is playing out? No. And that's why we zeroed in on it and we began to really focus on how do we do some increased outreach for those businesses? How do we get them connected with the SBA loan products that are out there? And really the PPP, which is really the key for them to be successful right now. That's the product that we have everyone going to.
That's a big issue that needs to be fixed. I know there's already conversation with current congressional members about what to put in the next package, because the problem was that, yes, our small businesses, our mom and pop shops, they didn't get any of this money, and there was no way of them to get the money based on the requirements. I'm hearing with certain paperwork that, almost was impossible, I guess, for them to get. So it's really important that this next stimulus package, CARES package, whatever you want to call it, is broken down, that our small businesses get the grants that they need to sustain and reopen once this is done. So it's terribly critical that we make sure they get it.
Well, I represent a lot of taxi drivers, a lot of bodegueros, and a lot of supermarket workers and supermarket owners in my particular district. I was on a conference call till about 11 o'clock at night with Congressman Adriano Espaillat and many of my colleagues in the city and federal level. And first of all, I want to thank the Congressman for his leadership in Washington and pushing that, make sure that we put more money that actually goes directed into small businesses that impact our community. So again, we need to make sure that the federal government steps up, puts more money into these programs, and that it takes away from having sort of the Ruth's Chris Steakhouses or even the Shake Shack, who apparently returned $20 million in relief that they didn't need, because there were a lot of loopholes put into the first stimulus package that the feds put together. But we need to make sure that we narrow the language and that it actually helps small and micro businesses in our districts, and that we hope to go back to Albany in hopefully the next few days or so, to see what the state can do to help support that work as well.
And despite the ongoing spread of the coronavirus, our Open Wednesday spent a lot of time focusing on other developments in the healthcare system. We have invited some experts from respective fields to provide some insight and give us some awareness on some key health matters. We take a look at those right now.
Well, first of all, we're educating them. As we know, COVID-19 is really COVID-2, back when we had SARS, if everybody remembers that. So we're understanding what the virus is, and SARS is COVID-2. So we're taking the mutated piece and we're trying to work variables around it. So we're trying to get the vaccine, we're trying to get standards of care, and of course, avoidance of the contact through washing the hands, through skin-to-skin contact, and then through face-to-face contact, which is why we're wearing face masks. Has to do with personal care. The person-to-person contact, of course, with COVID is running the risk of mom contracting it, and then new baby with no immune system contracting the virus as well. Breast is best, and it has the greatest antigens and basic subsidies to build the milk, build the immune system, and build the immunity in the baby. So while baby's newborn, it really doesn't have anything for 28 days. So it's always best to treat the baby as though it has no immune system, similar to someone with cancer, someone that has a compromised immune system because of age or because of the understanding of a health disparity. So you always want to make sure that the person-to-person contact is limited. So the hospitals have put in very, very strong, very stringent rules and regulations as to who can go in and when they can go in. So that means who can go in, who is going to be the less viable to give or contract the virus. And then when they can go in, we can't have them in there all day, every day, going in and out, going back and forth. You have to either stay in there or leave. If you have to leave, they're going to ask you to redo your contamination procedures. And this is very key as a first responder and having women come into care while they were pregnant. This was very, very needed because women were saying that they were coming down with the virus and couldn't bond with their baby. So in the very, very beginnings, we were noticing the disparity in having the women be distant or maybe even wear a face mask with their newborn. So we realized we had to put other protocols in place and make sure that the babies are safe and mommy was healthy.
So osteoporosis affects the bones of the body. It makes them more brittle, and hence simple stresses or emotions like a cough or a sneeze can cause a vertebral compression fracture and result in significant pain and debilitation. The spine is made up of building blocks or bony blocks stacked on each other. And we can kind of think of each of these blocks as almost like a brick, if you will, but it's round. And if the bones get weakened and a compression fracture occurs, the bone collapses upon itself at one level. And when that collapse occurs, it results in severe pain, in deformity and kyphosis or angulation of the back. The fracture itself is causing pain because it's unstable. It's as if when you have a fracture in your forearm or your leg and a cast is not on it yet and you try to move, it hurts. The same thing is occurring in the back. The areas in the back that are particularly predisposed is a concern for vertebral compression fracture, however. The management strategies are as follows. First, there's conservative management with bed rest, pain medications, medications for spasm, and perhaps back bracing. This may be tried, and some people do respond to that, and if it helps you get better and feel better, that's fine.
So, we are all experiencing the same stress, even though we're all sheltering in place at home and we're alone, we're all in this together. And we're still in the midst of this pandemic. So we don't have all the numbers, but we do have this one very interesting CDC study that came out in June, where 1 in 4 people between the ages of 18 and 34 seriously considered suicide. And 11% of everyone that was surveyed during this 1 week in June reported having seriously thought about suicide in the past 30 months. If everybody watching can remember, there's 3 very simple steps that they can do. And I'll just go through the steps and then I'll talk about them if that's okay. So
Certainly.
The steps are ask, listen, and get help. So if you're talking with a loved one, either in person or on the phone or via video, and you have any concerns that that person is thinking about ending their life, and it could be just as simple as, hey, I'm worried about you. You say these things, are you thinking about killing yourself or committing suicide or any of the words that's comfortable for you to use? And then when that person answers, listen, it's very difficult and it's scary when you ask that question, to have that person that you're talking to say, yes, I'm having those thoughts. But let that person talk. That's their experience. Don't try to tell them it's going to get better. Don't try to minimize it for them. Just simply listen. They're taking a big risk, and they're probably also very relieved that somebody's asked them. They're living with these thoughts. And then the last step is get help. And it could be something as easy as doing a 3-way call with NYC Well, which is the 24-hour hotline for mental health and substance abuse issues here in New York City. And that number is 888-692-9355. And I highly recommend that when you're making that phone call with someone, to stay on the phone with them for the whole time, because you never know, that person might have that brave moment and tell you they're having those thoughts. But then when they're on the phone with the counselor, they may actually disconnect the call before giving it any of their information. And NYC Well can then do a couple of different things. They'll speak to that person, they'll do a further assessment of the suicide risk, and they can make referrals. They can make referrals to community resources, especially to mobile crisis teams, which could be really helpful in this day and age.
Some of the disparities that have occurred for years is that the Black women, and I can give you some of the statistics, sorry, chemo brain doesn't allow me to memorize it, but according to the American Cancer Society, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer, about 252,000 or more per year, with an estimate of 40,000 dying of breast cancer. Now, the rates in white women are about 130.8 per 100,000 women, and from that, a mortality rate of 20%. For Blacks, 126.7, with 28.4% women dying of breast cancer. And for Latinas, about 93.8 get diagnosed annually, with 14% dying.
Wow.
The numbers don't meet. We see that more Black women are being diagnosed at a younger age. And although their rates are a little lower or close to white women, what's happening is more of them are dying. 40% more Black women are dying of breast cancer.
I mean, if COVID has taught us anything, it's that it's really important to be aware of, your impact on other people. So, even if you're healthy, you can still have no outward signs of the flu and be carrying the flu and infecting other people, especially people who are high risk, such as young children, older adults, pregnant women, people with heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, obesity. I mean, there's so many people who could be at high risk for complications of the flu. So it's really important to protect everybody.
Well, diagnosis, treatment, medical advice, prevention, these are all the things that our healthcare professionals brought you through the year of 2020. We hope that we brought you more awareness here on Open Wednesday. We encourage you to stay with us because we've got the best of Open 2020 when we return right here on BronxNet. And welcome back here to the best of Open Wednesday. I'm Daren Jaime, where we're bringing you the news, the information, and the highlights, all that were from the year of 2020. Well, we know the pandemic has triggered a historic economic downturn, leaving millions unemployed. Also, Black Lives Matter protests have reignited discussions about social justice, systemic racism, inequality, as well as police reform. The community is advocating for issues such as food insecurity, economic justice, voting rights, and also speaking out against racial injustice. Here are a look at some of the best clips that we brought you in 2020.
I was actually in the spot where George Floyd died. It's become a makeshift memorial when we found out that the first officer had been arrested. And there wasn't that much celebration because first the charges seemed light. We felt it should be first-degree murder. And also we're waiting on the indictment of the other 3 officers who played a part in the murder of Mr. Floyd. It was a safe space in the daytime. It was a lot of crying and praying and people cooking and handing out food and granola bars and water. The evenings became very hot. The city was burning, and I don't think it was members of not only my organization, but the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. We saw a lot of plants as everyone was chanting and protesting. If we double back down a block, there would be a new fire. The police became very aggressive, and the governor of Minnesota started to issue warnings. We were being hunted down. To be completely transparent with you, we had to switch hotels. They were blaming organizers from out of town for inciting the riots, even though we just arrived on Friday and the city had been burning for a few days before then. So it was a very anxious time. But not only were we being hunted down, I knew I had to get back to New York because things started to pop off here.
I mean, we have George Floyd's that happened throughout our history since the enslaved Africans were brought here. And what we're seeing is just a combination of things. We're seeing, we're still in a pandemic. We can't forget that. So we're still in this pandemic where it's been reported that African Americans are more susceptible to the virus because of underlying health conditions. And a lot of us have been in quarantine. And then we had these series of weeks of just seeing Black body after Black body after Black body being murdered on screen. And I think when you look at it from a mental health standpoint, it's too much. And rage starts to boil over. Luckily, we've been always doing this work and this organizing. And so we're able to give people an outlet to put that agitation into demanding policies that create change.
When you think about this society, it's capitalist society. If we want to be heard, we're taught like go vote. That's it. We're taught that we need to be in those spaces. But also, if our money is where our mouth is, then they'll hear us. So I think that as well as like we're educating people too. Like we're educating people about the Black dollar, about Black wealth, and we're educating ourselves. It's just interesting how we had to really unlearn a lot of things about this. So a lot of like stigmas associated with Black businesses as well. So I like that it's new for me, and it's making me realize that we really do need to learn more about money and support people that look like us.
Not about it. So the key about 50A is that what repealing 50A basically allows is that disciplinary records of police can now be made public. There is no secrecy that can pertain for any police officer. And so if there are police officers who have disciplinary records based on issues in the community, things that we should know about as a community, that now must be released. That facilitates the whole conversation that we've been having around police accountability. If you want to get to a place where we can start having trust in the police, it has to start with accountability. If a police officer does something wrong, we need to know about it. If a police officer does something right, we need to know about it. It's not just negative, it's also the positive. They are good police officers who should want these kinds of accountability metrics because that makes their life easier because we are able to say, you know what, these people are the problem, as opposed to now, because of this wall of secrecy, we can say all police are the problem, which is not, in my view, the ideal structure. The ideal structure is let's get the bad cops out, let's keep the good ones in, and let's keep our community safe. But keeping our community safe should not have to involve over-policing, police brutality unnecessarily, because they know how to do it in other neighborhoods, we need them to have that same level of care in ours.
I remain hopeful that we can continue to strengthen the bonds between police and community. I am not an anti-police person or a legislator. I've never been that. And unfortunately, what happens when you try to do anything that relates to policing, people tend to muddy the waters and they try to say that you're trying to be or attempting to be anti-police. It couldn't be any further from the truth. So, Daren, as a lead sponsor of this legislation, I held 2 hearings last October, one in Albany and one in New York City, to ensure that I elicited conversation and comments from not just my side of the perspective, but law enforcement. And the resounding conversation, the resounding issue that law enforcement members had was an issue of privacy. That they said they didn't want their families' names, addresses, social security numbers, those things getting out in the public sphere. I agreed with them then, and I agree with them now. And that was something that we were able to put into the law, into the legislation, that while we repeal Section 50A, we were able to strengthen the FOIL. We were able to strengthen the public officers law around FOIL, meaning that these records, the personal records, has no business in the public sphere. Nobody has the right to go to harass or annoy or bother an officer or their family. I'm going to be very clear about that. But the original intent of the legislation back in 1976, Senator Frank Padovan, the legislation was intended to stop that type of harassment and annoyment, not to serve as a bar on disciplinary records. So it's just to understand where we've been to get where we're going.
And as well others, and I ask you, Daren, and I ask everyone who's listening, Black has been going through a struggle since the inception of this country. And you've heard me say it before, till we can fix the 3/5 clause, a lot of the rules and things that we put in place, it doesn't really do the job. It's just, we're not getting to the root. We're not chopping down the whole tree. We're just breaking off a branch and thinking that we've cured this problem in this tree. We haven't done that. And while COVID is, while COVID has brought us together, and it's brought some people together that may not understand the experience of being Black in America, but they're experiencing it because as a wealthy white person, you may not be able to drive that car around, or if you lost your job, you not be able to pay your rent, or the food shopping that you do is down to a minimum. Your kids are home with you. Now you're dealing with your kids every day, like we have to deal with our kids every day. So I say to those who are out on a different fight, welcome to being a Black in America. But when things get to some sense of normalcy or the change is the change, I ask us all still to stay together to making sure that everyone is treated equally in the United States of America.
Well, we also want you to know that 2020 has been a whirlwind year, particularly in the world of politics. It may have been really difficult to keep up with the presidential election as well as the policies and regulations that are affecting our community, but we took the time to discuss with political and legal experts, breaking down some of the issues and matters that affected you. Here are some of the best highlights that we have for you for 2020. It seems like every time we talk, the governor seems to be making some sort of new push or new extension. But give us a little bit about this here. We've got January 1st. This new extension is in place. Let's talk to about what this actually means for as tenants as well as landlords.
Okay, what the extension means is if you have a COVID hardship and the landlord wants to bring a non-payment eviction where you haven't defaulted on your landlord-tenant rental payments, they have to wait until the end of the year in order to do that. In fact, there's legislation that says, that's been passed and approved by the governor, that says even when they bring that non-payment proceeding, the landlord is able to seek the money due, but they're not able to evict you if you're able to prove that you have a COVID-related hardship. Now, even though there are these protections, and there's federal protections that say non-payment proceedings for those of us who are facing COVID hardships is going to be, there's going to be a reprieve until the end of the year. Notwithstanding that, holdovers can be brought right now. So you can bring a holdover eviction. And what that means is if you don't have a lease, or if you had a month-to-month lease and your landlord decided to terminate that month-to-month lease, they can actually proceed with the eviction process. Now, even though they can technically, under the executive order and under the CDC guidance, and under the statutory relief that's been passed by lawmakers in Albany, even though they can proceed with those holdovers, nothing is really moving forward at this point. The court is moving very slow at a snail's pace to deal with the evictions that it was dealing with back before March 17th happened, before we had the COVID pandemic. For those who their lease expired or they weren't making rental payments before March 17th. And because the courts are really busy right now dealing with those cases where you have landlord harassment or landlords taking actions where they're removing possessions without authority of a sheriff. So you have the courts tied up with those cases. They have to deal with these cases in a socially distant way. So you're not going to see those new holdover cases, particularly in the city of New York, being dealt with until February, until March, until April. And we're really, in my opinion, I'm not, as long as you're answering your holdover petition, as long as you're responding and raising the relevant defenses, I really don't see this thing picking up until May or June of next year.
Certainly the government has passed a series of laws to help people dealing with the virus, and as you say, people helping their families in coping with the virus. There are two primary opportunities for relief under what's called the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And I'll give you two basic examples. First, if you happen to be sick with the virus or quarantined because you suspect you might be sick with the virus, there's an opportunity to apply for and receive leave up to 2 weeks or 80 hours, if you will, of full paid leave so that you can either heal if you're ill or at least make sure you quarantine yourself and don't get other people sick if you're carrying the virus but not showing symptoms yet, right? So that's one element for you personally if you as an employee are sick. As a secondary item, which is equally important, let's say you have a family member who's sick or under quarantine, or a school-age child who has to stay home, who can't go to school because of the virus. In that case, there are 80 hours available of leave for you to help care for a quarantined family member or to help care for that sick child at 2/3 pay. These are two meaningful amounts of time where you get paid either in full or at 2/3 pay for caring for yourself or quarantining yourself or caring for others who are under quarantine or just caring for your family for that matter.
It's basically 5 teachers who are really heading a class action in New York City, bringing in action, forcing New York City to justify why they have to go to work and why they can't work remotely. And they're basically, these 5 teachers who are leading the litigation are arguing in the lawsuit. This is really a Hobson's choice. In other words, if we don't go into school and we lose our job as a teacher, then we can't feed our families and there's an economic hardship. If we do go into school and we teach the class, there is a potential for harm to our physical bodies, and therefore somebody in our family could have, dire consequences and unfortunately pass away. So we lose either way. The only way we can win is if we're able to stay at home and teach remotely. However, the City of New York Board of Education says, well, you do not meet the CNC guidelines for the ability to work from home. Therefore, you must still go in. Teachers say, hey, we have to take public transportation. That in itself is a risk. We don't know, the type of setting that we're going into. We don't know exactly how it's being sanitized. We haven't been given enough information. So we believe that we've been put at harm. And that's why we are bringing this lawsuit to force you to allow us to work remotely, or in the alternative, if we are harmed as a result of going in, there's going to be some type of damages, could be, just a regular civil lawsuit, and that may end up having to go before a jury, which
I think you look at voters on both sides, Trump supporters of Biden, Harris coming out and being active and trying to win in those states where they believe they need to win in order to either keep their guy in or to elect Biden and Harris to the White House. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of political organizing. Yes, there's violence in some cities over police brutality and the killings of our unarmed black men. But it's also, causing people to become more self-aware, to speak out, as we're seeing among those athletes, whether it's in basketball, football, hockey, and other sports, taking a stand and saying what they believe in. And you had the ball players in Milwaukee walking away from their game in protest of what happened in Kenosha, and then the others following suit, taking a time out and saying, look, this is getting worse. We got to say something. We got to stop it. We got to make people think about it and hopefully come to the right decision when it comes to police accountability and it comes to the rhetoric coming out of the White House.
Well, informative discussion there. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have the best of Open 2020 on the Wednesday edition right after this. Back to the best of Open Wednesday. Daren Jaime here with you. Well, the shutdowns at schools due to the COVID-19 pandemic posed many challenges to students and teachers throughout the year. They were forced to adapt to a world of remote or blended learning, and as a consequence, many of the children who struggled the hardest to learn effectively and thrive in school under normal circumstances are now finding it even more difficult, particularly even impossible in some cases, to receive effective instruction. Well, we try to keep you informed on how educational opportunities have shifted from traditional programs, I should say, to virtual learning and how they've adjusted to the COVID-19 pandemic. We take a look back at how our students, as well as our teachers, are trying to cope with the world of education during the year 2020.
The most important thing that we understand is the need for flexibility. We had planned on opening our hybrid model on the 9th of September, and for various reasons, which we'll get into, we decided to delay the hybrid until October 5th. And so we began remote last week, and it's been going really, really well.
Yeah. When we talk about reopening, I think a lot of people were really having a lot of concerns about whether or not it was going to be safe to reopen. And I know that schools and the whole educational system had to go through an overhaul just like everybody else to really get ready. What were some of the challenges you faced going towards reopening?
Oh my goodness. There were so many. Making sure that we had the appropriate PPE for our students and our staff. Understanding what families wanted and needed. I think I should say that first, right? Like making sure that we weren't coming up with a plan that parents would then say, I'm not doing that. So we really had to be in constant communication with our families to make sure that whatever we put together was going to be something that would work for them. Then trying to figure out how we would pod children so that, we understood that from the CDC guidance, it was really best practice to have kids in small groups so that if there was a case of COVID, we could shut down a pod and not have to shut down a whole school. So we had to figure that out and understand how that would affect the way we educate kids. And then our buildings and understanding what the needs were for our buildings, one of which our elementary school is in a private space and our middle school is in a DOE space. So then understanding the difference between what we could do from a private space and then what we needed to do as we were part of the DOE in terms of space. So those were some of the challenges.
Extremely complicated. It's hard. This is the first time we're doing it. So we're actually asking our parents and our kids to, be patient as we all learn a whole new way of learning. That said, we're very confident, our families are going to do great. Before, when this crisis was emerging, we did surveys of our families just to get a sense of who had technology in the home or not, which households have devices, whether it be cell phones, iPads. For those homes that don't have a device, we've actually delivered Chromebooks. So we've tried to make things, even literally Wi-Fi connection. There are organizers like Comcast who are providing free Wi-Fi and hotspots. So we're first and foremost, we're trying to ensure every single family has connectivity and a device for which they can learn. But you're right, there's a big difference between, we have kids in pre-K all the way through 8th grade.
Things are changing on a daily basis, almost hourly, which is somewhat difficult. We've been building a really great process. So back in March, when we went to remote learning, we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we ensure that our scholars at South Bronx Classical are able to get the best instruction possible despite being home and not in the building. We spent March, April, May, and June working on that. We knew that sometime in August or September, school would open again, and with a physical building and on-site learning would occur. We still don't know exactly what day that will happen. That's going to be up to Governor Cuomo primarily. But we're working on a program that emphasizes parent choice. So what we've done is we've actually polled and surveyed our parents and asked them, what do you want? Do you want on-site learning? Do you want a mix? Do you want remote learning just as you had in the spring? And we're working on that now to ensure that every scholar gets what their parents really want. We have some parents, obviously, on one side who are either immunocompromised or just scared, and they don't want to take medical risks. So they're going to want their children to be inside their house learning remotely. But we have other parents who really want their child in school, either for improved learning or often because they need to get to work. And we do definitely want to emphasize the equity problems and crisis that's coming about because a lot of people in our community are not able to work. We want to meet both of their needs. So it's been a lot of conversation with our 1,500 parents and talking to them about what they prefer and then meeting that with a schedule that works.
We've been in the same boat as all other colleges and universities across the country, right? Suddenly confronted with this problem. And like everybody else, it was sort of slowly dawning on us, right? And we look back now, we're very smart now that we look back and we see exactly what everybody should have been doing. I'm a scientist and a biologist, so I couldn't help myself. There was a meeting on February 28th that the state ed department and the Department of Health had for all the college leaders around the state. And they rolled out kind of, here's what we think is happening. At that time, there was one case in all of New York State. If you can think about that, go back to February 28th, there was one case. And they put the data up on the table, here's how many we've tested. And of course, it was very few people. And so what I started doing from that day forward, I started tuning into the state website every day, and I started making my own graph of what's happening. So by March 9th, which was about a week and a half later, right? By March 9th, there were about 20 cases in New York City, that's all. But when I was plotting this curve, I could see it was going, it wasn't a straight line, it was an exponential looking curve. And I thought to myself, that's what's going to happen. Even though there's hardly any data right now, I can see what's happening in New York City, what's happening in New York State. And so that put me on really high alert. February 28th, I got together a big group on campus. We started talking about what are we going to do here? What are we looking forward? And I told the group, we met again the next week, and I said, you know what? We got to be ready to close in 2 days because I don't know that that's going to happen. That's the governor's call. But I think it might happen. And guess what? 2 days later, we were ready to move all the students off campus.
If you realize that it took us almost like a week to move from in-person classroom and move everything to the digital platform. 90% of our courses pre-March 7th were in person on campus, in our beautiful campus. Come March 11th, March 12th, we got the word around that we got to move. We have an excellent faculty. We have a wonderful staff. People really came together to make sure that we really move all of our classes online. I mean, from the in-person classes to the G2 platform. To me, it's been a wonderful experience. One of the reasons why I took this job 5 years ago is the commitment that I found from the faculty and the staff. And really, in times of crisis, is when you really know the commitment of our staff and our faculty. It's been a wonderful experience. We're learning through it all. To me, I think it's at the end of the day, Bronx Community College is going to be a better institution because of what we did during March to move our students and serve our students in a more digital platform mode. Come March 12th, we moved everything out. We now got to communicate with everybody. Wow, we all got to use Zoom, got to use WebEx. If for me, I had the initial challenge of getting to learn how to use Zoom, getting how to learn WebEx. So you can imagine for our students, a lot of our students are people that live with their families at home. Probably they have only one laptop or sometimes zero in their house. So one of the first and foremost challenge for our students is even when the materials are developed, how do they get the content and do whatever they need to do? We found that out quickly. We had to look for means. Our assemblyman, two of our assembly people supported us. We got laptops that we have to distribute to students. I think Irene and Lester talked about this the last time around. In fact, we had to pause for 1 week to recalibrate things to make sure our faculty are really in tune and also for our students in tune. It's been a wonderful challenge and experience for our students, but we've responded appropriately by providing the necessary tools for our students to work with at home. Some of the students don't have access to network, to internet, which we all take for granted. We've been able to work with some of the providers to provide internet services and hotspots for some of our students. It's really been a challenge for us, but I am so grateful that to our faculty and staff.
Well, we turn our attention now to the community. Well, despite the challenge of social distancing, the community has become more and more involved in the Bronx, as well as throughout New York City in the year of 2020. Organizations and individuals have banded themselves together in offering a wide variety of assistance and services to those in need and making things more accessible to people of all ages. Well, we take a look back and highlight some of those programs and initiatives that took place in 2020 to make our community a much better and a much safer space.
A rewarding experience. I mean, this all started, about almost 4 months ago now, almost to the day, where I was just walking home from from the subway to my apartment in Queens, and I saw my local supermarket. This was like the middle of March, so we weren't on like full lockdown quarantine times yet, but it was starting to not look so great. And I was walking by my local Key Foods, and there were just a ton of elderly folk coming in and out. And I remember thinking, like, this doesn't feel safe. I wish there was some way that I could offer to just go in and do their shopping so they could stay outside the store. And I went home and I just posted on my Facebook, and I was like, hey, does anybody know of a way that a young, healthy person could volunteer to bring groceries to the elderly or the immunocompromised right now? And a bunch of my friends reached out and basically said, I don't know of an organization or something that's doing this, but I would love to help if you find something. And then an old friend of mine, Liam, called me. He saw the status and he basically reached out and was like, wait, I love this. Let's why don't we do something? Why don't we be the people to make this? And we kind of put our heads together and we launched Invisible Hands. And, in the past almost 4 months, I think the way that New York has responded to the crisis has really changed and grown. An infrastructure that didn't exist a few months ago now does exist. And it's been amazing to be a part of the story of how New Yorkers really came together to support each other during this time. So it has definitely been a wild ride.
We saw a huge increase of need, obviously right in the beginning of COVID, and ended up we've fed over 34,000 older New Yorkers who were not originally on our rolls. And always, or historically before COVID, 1 in 10 older New Yorkers was hungry. We're only seeing increases in that number now. And I think as we get into winter, look, you and I are dealing with isolation like we never have before. The homebound elderly that we nourish deal with that every day. And all older New Yorkers now need to stay in. And even, on a nice day, yesterday, brisk but nice, you could get out, you could go to the corner market. But as winter hits, that's going to be even more challenging, both for your physical well-being, the slippery streets, but also your physical safety and in staying away from COVID. meals coming to the door and also that check-in, right? So it's a healthy, nutritious meal coming every day. Our weekend services, weekday services remained uninterrupted during COVID. And in addition to the meal, it is still a check-in to make sure that person who is home alone is okay. Of course, we've adapted, right? Before COVID, you could go in, sometimes hug a person when you've had a long relationship with them, a deliverer and a meal recipient. Now it's through the door. We hang the meal on a doorknob. We knock. We make sure the person opens and is there to get their meal. And we are still checking in on them. It is critical to have some connectivity to the outside world. You know, we say we're nourishing body and soul. So it is as important. The nutrition is as important as that human connection.
Absolutely. So what we see first and foremost, I think for a lot of us, including myself, is people just want to be asked, how are you? How are you doing? I think as this pandemic wears on, and again, as flu season and other factors continue to come at us, it's really first and foremost about how are you faring? We've really seen an uptick in the need for mental health services. And so being out in the community was not only a chance to make sure that we were giving needed supplies, but frankly, to connect with folks, obviously in a socially distanced, masked, appropriate way. But just those simple interactions, I think at this time when so many of our residents, especially our older residents, have really been homebound, that connection's really important, which is why Emblem Health is not only out in the community, but we've been working to stand up virtual programming so that we can really, try and give people healthy resources, but also that basic human connection.
So we are part of a coalition of organizations, the Volunteer Coordination Task Force with New York City. So we have an agreement with New York City Emergency Management. When a disaster strikes the city, we're responsible for creating a pipeline to manage spontaneous volunteers. We were engaged for 9/11, we were engaged for Hurricane Sandy, and most recently, we've been engaged for the COVID response. Anytime you see very high levels of unemployment, you are going to see people needing what we would call emergency food. So if you're not able to, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, that's what emergency food is. It's making sure that your family can get to what's next, that you have food on your table in your house. And so we anticipated with all of the closures and the very high level of joblessness that emergency food was going to rise. We have not seen levels of food insecurity like this, of homelessness like this, since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And so, when you go to a soup kitchen, when you go to a food pantry, I've been doing this work for about 10 years. I have never seen anything like this. It really is truly mind-blowing. And the number of people who have come out and said, I'm going to help, is also truly mind-blowing. It's really, it really uplifts your spirit.
Well, thank you. And that about ends our look back at the year 2020. I want to thank all of you who are viewed, and I want to thank all of our special guests who've been with us throughout the year of 2020, making it a special year here for us on Open Wednesday. And yes, despite the pandemic and despite the challenges, we were able to still bring you news and current events virtually. Now, if you missed any part of today's look back at 2020, well, what do? You do the same thing that you always do. You can look back at the Recablecast that airs on BronxNet Channel 67. If you have Optimum, that's Channel 2133, or anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. And please, don't forget, stay connected to us on all of our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. And if you want to make sure to get another episode of Open, my girl Rita Valentine, she's always on every Friday, bringing you a brand new episode, particularly in the area of arts and entertainment. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying, look, take care. God bless. 2020, we've made it. Let's keep pressing. We'll hope to see you soon.